What's up, everybody? This is Naaman from Butler Video at Butler Branding. Today I want to share with you the 3 best camera settings to get good lighting. The camera settings you have: ISO, shutter speed, aperture, also known as f-stop or t-stop, depending on the cinema lens, sensor type. Right, so I want to break these down for you real simple as well. Now, when it comes to sensor types, there's about 3 major ones out on the market today. You have full frame, APS-C, and micro four thirds. So you just picture them as the amount of crop that the frame will give you, right? So if this is full, APS-C will be somewhere, it's I think roughly 1.6% crop, and then micro four thirds will be a smaller sensor, right? So boom, boom, boom. Now the biggest difference, they're made so well nowadays, the technology, you really can't tell that much. Of course, the more expensive the camera, the more bells and whistles, the higher quality image you'll get. But one of the main differences for me that I noticed, and that just to make it a lot more simple, there's so many like technicalities and a few different like numbers you can crunch. It's like, well, this lens will give you this look on this sensor. But to keep it real simple, you just want to remember that full frame will allow more light and background blur in, and the smaller the sensor, the less light and less background blur. But of course, there are exceptions nowadays, because there's some cameras that can get you a great image, great quality, and it could be micro four thirds. Exhibit A is the Blackmagic 4K. It's a micro four thirds sensor, but it gets excellent images. The technology in that camera is exceptional. A rule of thumb for these different settings is the higher the number, the darker your image will be. For example, you have landscape and portrait. These are 2 types of pictures as well as 2 types of videos, right? That'll be another video coming up, by the way, is shot type. There'll also be sequencing, workflow. I mean, there's so many topics we're going to dive into. But for now, I'm just explaining 2 of them. There's landscape, so which is usually more outdoors. You want your numbers a little higher because you got a lot of sunlight coming in and a lot of different things. And for portrait, you want your numbers lower because you're a little more close up. You have a little bit more control. So just to break it down for you, ISO is the amount of digital light allowed into your sensor. Shutter speed is the amount of motion blur, and aperture is the amount of background blur. Now, of course, there's more technical terms for these, but I'm making it as simple as possible. When I simplify things for myself, it helps me remember them a lot better. So I'm just putting them out real simple for you as well. When it comes to Kelvin / color temp, you also have this setting on your camera, and it ranges usually between 2000 and 6000. And as mentioned before, the lower the number, so 2K is going to be definitely a lot more yellow, 6K is going to be a lot more blue. But depending on your shot, you want to mix all these settings together to get yourself a great image. For color temperature, a real quick bonus tip is that for rural landscapes, you want to use 2,000 to 3,000 for rural landscapes and 4,000 to 5,000 for urban landscapes. For portrait pictures, you usually want to use lower number settings because you're up close, and you want to use around 4,000 to 4,500 Kelvin in color temperature, and that's pretty much smack dab in the middle, right? You don't want it too blue, you don't want it too yellow, you want it somewhere in the middle. And if you're working mostly with natural light, you'll have it that. I bet you anything in my camera right now is between 45 to 4700, somewhere in the middle, because I have a more controlled environment and I want my light to be more natural. Another bonus tip for outdoor lighting, which I did not write in here, was to have a ND filter, which is a neutral density filter. With higher end cinema cameras, these are sometimes built in. You have a switch, boom, boom. You can switch the filters inside the camera itself in front of the sensor. And but for a lot of the consumer grade cameras, you got to buy an overlay cap for your lens where you can put on your filter. Now these come in 2 different types. They are usually numbered or variable. I personally use variable, although they have a bad rap for giving you lower quality. So ND filter allows you to darken shot, right? So it allows you to remove some of the light from your shot. Now, some of the rules of thumbs here is you want to keep your ISO as low as possible. The higher your ISO, the more digital noise, right, and the grain. And one example for this is if you've ever taken a photo or video on your cell phone at nighttime, it's always super grainy and you can hardly maybe even see anything because it's so grainy. And this happens real similarly with digital cameras as well. You bump up the ISO. If you go any higher than, I want to say 3200, depending on some cameras, some cameras go pretty high and give you pretty good quality, but you want to stay usually under 1000, around 1200. Anything higher than like 4000, 5000 is going to introduce a little bit of grain. Shutter speed is the amount of motion blur. So this also applies to photography, but in video, you want to have your shutter speed double your frame rate. Now, what frame rate in video is the amount of pictures your camera takes per second. Now, that's all video is. Video is the amount of pictures. It's many pictures taken in 1 second. Now, the average frame rate is 24. So for natural speed, right now I'm recording at 24 frames per second, and that shows a natural speed. And for slow motion, it's between 60 to 120 frames per second. Now, of course, there's high-speed cameras that record up to 3,000, 10,000, 100,000, 300,000. Those are like the extremely slow-mo, like that slow-mo guys YouTube channel, which we all love and adore. But your shutter speed, you usually want to keep it double the number of your frame rate. So if I'm recording at 24, oh, my marker's getting dry, 24 FPS, I want to record at 48 to 50 in shutter speed. Sometimes what people will do is they'll increase the shutter speed to darken their image, but the trade-off for your video is that there won't be much motion blur and it'll look very it'll look a little too abrupt. It won't look natural to the eye when you record the footage, especially if there's a lot of motion going on. There's a natural motion blur that comes with your natural eye, and you want to simulate that in your video. And if your shutter speed is too high, then you're not going to get a very good video clip. It's going to be very jarring. Now, there's digital motion blur you can add, but it can be time consuming and can slow down your workflow. Now, your aperture is something I love to play with. This does depend more on your lens. There's some lenses that only allow you to do 4.0 aperture, and some lenses that are really great. So the one I'm shooting on now does 1.1 aperture, which is definitely on the lower end. It's a very low. I think the lowest I've heard of is a 0.95 f-stop. There's two types of apertures. There's f-stop, which is used more for photography, and then t-stop. And one of the main differences that I've heard is just the range, right? So with an f-stop, you rotate the ring just a couple of inches, and the focus pull will be very quick. And with a t-stop, you'll rotate your focus ring a lot farther, and the focus pull will be a lot slower. And the reason this is important for video is because when you have things moving, you have more precision available. F-stop is used more for photography because if you're using auto, boom, boom, the auto just moves very quickly, locks in your focus, click, you got your picture. So aperture introduces more background blur. Now, aperture is one of the reasons why cell phone shots look pretty flat. They're not made to capture much background blur. I mean, some iPhones are, and some of the newer phones are with the portrait mode setting. They're usually made to capture standard shot, a flat shot. Now, if you are using nothing but a cell phone for your videos, for your business or your nonprofit organization at this time, I think a lot of us are with this shelter in place. One app you can buy if you have the budget to is Filmic Pro. This app allows you to have a lot of cool settings and different capabilities that your general camera app is not going to allow. So real quick, I want to go into my 3 tips for the best possible lighting that I like to use. Now, I say that I like to use because once you explore and learn your camera and your gear, you might find settings that you like to use better. So tip number 1 is to get the lowest aperture possible for background blur. So like I mentioned, I'm using 1.8. I have the lowest 1.1, but that can introduce some chromatic aberration in bright situations. You might even be able to see some here where there's like some bright areas. There's a color infringement where the colors split a little bit. This does depend on the type of lens. Some cameras even have color aberration removal. So the reason why I want to get the lowest aperture possible, when your natural eye sees something, the background is actually blurry. For example, hold your hand in front of your face right now, and if you notice, the background of everything behind your hand is blurry. So if you close one eye, it might help you see more like actual camera. If you look at your hand, It's in focus, look behind. Now your hand is out of focus, and that's what it feels and looks like to pull the focus and have a low aperture with more background blur. Tip number 2 is get the lowest ISO possible. Again, the reason for this is because it introduces a lot of grain and noise, and overall just kind of lowers the quality of your actual shot. And then tip number 3 is to have your shutter speed double the number of your frame rate. Now, to get these lower settings, I think it's worth mentioning one more time a ND filter. It's like sunglasses for your lens, and it gives you a much crisp, cleaner looking shot, especially outdoors. I don't think I use the ND filter very much indoors, but definitely outdoors or in very bright situations. So if you have even a studio shot and you want that background blur and all your lights are very bright, you want that ND filter. But that was it, guys. Thanks again for watching all the way through. As always, if you have any thoughts or questions or comments, please post them down below, and we will see you guys next time.